Welcome, welcome, welcome. Kicking with Coach K podcast. This is episode 41. I am your host, Coach K, and I am here with Coach Missy Mitchell-Mcbeth. I appreciate you coming in tonight, Coach. I know just based off of things I've read on Twitter and just kind of following you the last few years, very well respected, very well rounded as far as your knowledge in what you do, very good at your craft. We appreciate you coming on tonight. We're going to go over a few sponsors, and then we're going to dive in and just kind of go over a couple things as it kind of pertains, to your field. And, I do some strength and conditioning myself for football and volleyball, and just some different topics today and get to know a little bit about you in the process. So this show is brought to you by Brain Jerk Entertainment, Kennedy Health and Wellness. Welcome to the Brain Jerk era. These guys, of course, down here in downtown Monroe, we're at the studio. Every week we're here on Sunday for Kicking It with Coach K at 7 p.m. And then, guys, every Wednesday we are here for Pillar Talk, which is more of we just kind of bring in interesting people for important conversations. Important people for interesting conversations. So last week we had Bob Vergils on. For those of you in our local community here in Michigan and Monroe County, you guys know Bob. He's a longtime announcer for the Detroit Tigers, Detroit Lions, Toledo Storm, Toledo Walleye, still the announcer right now for the Toledo Walleye. That was a phenomenal episode. Bob has some incredible stories through sports and through announcing and all the things he's been able to accomplish. Make sure you guys go check that episode out. Again, there's podcast like 4 or 5 days a week here at the Brain Jerk Podcast Network and Brain Jerk Entertainment channel. You can find these on YouTube and Facebook Live. And make sure you guys tune in. Kennedy Health and Wellness, your one-stop shop. Everything wellness, from body care to candles. We've got a new office set up down here, guys. This is a hub for our community of businesses that we have, our bike club, our health and wellness retail, my coaching services, kind of everything that we do. This is an office set up downtown for us to take care of whatever you might need. So make sure you reach out for information or check on social media for that. Before we jump in, I do got to say, guys, we've got a coaching clinic coming up here on February 10th. All right. Tickets are just $25. If you come with multiple people, it's $20 a person. This is at Off the Rails in Dundee, Cilantro, for those of you who know it, formerly as Cilantro. Again, guys, that's an amazing deal. You're getting great food. You're going to get a drink. You're going to get 5 different sessions, right, with 5 different speakers, 5 different topics. This is any sport, any level, any experience can benefit from this, as this is a clinic that's really built around developing our kids and honestly, building your program, right? Different ways to fundraise, different ways to bring your kids together, all these different things that will benefit you no matter what sport you're in and whether you've been coaching for a year or, 20 years. So make sure you guys get your tickets. Tickets are done being sold on Wednesday. So you have Monday, you have tomorrow, Tuesday, and probably all day Wednesday. We'll run it through. And then Thursday, we're going to close the registration. So make sure you get your tickets ASAP. This show is brought to you by Amaya's Fresh Mexican Grill, the Little Brown Jug, Lane's Pizzeria, IWR, All Heart Athletics, Monroe County Sports Network, 1817 CrossFit, Big Back Prep, 8 Mile Vodka, Backroad Baggers, Smoker Society, Spooky Films, Nerdy Designs, and Just Drive with Jess. Quote of the day: suffer now and live the rest of your life as a champion. Muhammad Ali. Again, we bring everything we do as far as like our quote of the day. I say this every week. I'll keep this short, but it has to do with our guest or what they're doing, what field they're in. And for me, the weight room, and maybe, this is just how I feel as starting to do strength and conditioning the last 4 or 5 years. But where I've coached, you really have to sell it as you really have to convince them, right, that whatever they're doing, they may not be able to see the result right now, and whatever they're doing, it might suck right now, but you kind of have to embrace that to get that end result and get to where you want to go. So that's something that we chose for the quote of today. So before we jump into a couple different questions, just tell us about yourself, a little bit of your journey and who you are.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me on. It's always an honor to get asked to share kind of my journey and my philosophy and stuff. So I have a background as a high school volleyball coach is how I started my career. I got thrown in charge of the weight room because I like to lift, which is the situation that a lot of people find themselves in. And despite tens of hours of .com research, I figured out I was not prepared to do the job at a high level. So I was fortunate enough to have a mentor. He's still here in the state. His name's Reb Brock, that kind of took me under his wing. And through that process, I learned that being a strength and conditioning coach full time was what I wanted to do. So after 4 years as a high school biology teacher, head powerlifting coach, volleyball coach, high jump coach, all the things, I left and went back and got a master's degree. The final piece of that was doing an internship, which I did at TCU under Zach Dakent. Ended up getting hired on full time, worked there at the D1 level for 7 years. Decided I wanted a little bit more work life balance. And so I went back to the high school level, was the head strength coach at Byron Nelson High School in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area for 6 years, I believe. Left that position in 2022. I currently work for Powerlift, the equipment company, as a sales rep here in the state of Texas. And then I also, while I was a recovering strength coach, I got back on my drug after a year of recovery. And so I'm coaching at a volleyball club, Fieldhouse Volleyball Club here in the Dallas Fort Worth area. That's kind of an up and coming club. So I am their sports performance director, and I have finally achieved the dream of just working with the sport that I'm really passionate about, which is volleyball. Because I also play. I'm a weekend warrior. I still play beach on the weekends. I actually played today. So volleyball is kind of my thing. And to get to combine that with strength and conditioning is a really awesome place to be in life.
I love that. What a journey too. One of the things that fascinates me always about this show is hearing people's just kind of hearing where people have been and where they've evolved. I would say is the coolest thing, right? So like just being at all them different levels and them different places and knowing what you want and learning what you want and evolving in all those different ways. That's so impressive. So what is Safe Iron Training?
So that is my LLC that I do consulting under. So
Okay.
basically, I teach sport coaches how to do what I do safely and effectively if they don't have a strength and conditioning coach on campus. So I do things like phone consults, program audits. I go in and teach in services in person that I'll kind of customize to your level. In the past, I was doing some kind of custom training programs for individual programs that wanted to utilize my services. However, I found that that's not necessarily scalable income for me. So at this point in my life, it's become more of a consulting platform. But I'm also going to be here in the next 6 to 8 weeks. It should come out publishing my first book. And then I'll be launching a series of products after that.
So you are extremely busy. One thing
Tired. Yeah, tired is the word.
one thing I love though is I try to even me myself, I try to consume, different podcasts and different books and I always try to watch what I'm consuming and make sure it's things that are, conducive to health, success, kind of getting better, making more, better financial decisions, all those different things. And just that stuff is so impressive to because where I was getting with that is it's impressive to stay moving at that rate. Because it's easy when we're all super young, we're 18, 19, 20, 25, but it's to keep doing that after a certain age. And I feel like I've always kind of felt like 26, 27 is either an age where you start getting exposed for not taking care of yourself well, or, vice versa. It's kind of like that, and I could be wrong, maybe that's just my experience, right? But so to me, for somebody to stay moving in that sort of way, right, where you're still playing, you're still active every day, like that's a great message to the young generation, honestly, and anybody really, but especially to the young generation, to get active and stay active, and not just with your body, right, but your mind as well, involved in all that. I also just want to give you respect for having that kind of consulting coaching service right there. Like that's awesome. Coaches need resources. And I think that's an amazing thing that you do there.
Well, thank you. I think that the strength and conditioning industry tends to do a lot of gatekeeping, and act like we have the only intellect that could possibly understand how to safely and effectively train athletes. And it's like the way I always describe it is, as a volleyball coach, you are teaching someone to take a pass that's spinning 15, 20 feet in the air, and they're going to stop it with their fingertips, and they're going to redirect it without catching it into about a 6-inch by 6-inch box that you've determined based on your hitter's preferences, the opposing defense, the pass that you received, all of those things in an instant.
Right.
That's what a volleyball coach can do. But we're like, as a strength coach, like we think that that same person can't learn how to teach a squat. Like, get out of here with that. Like, it's us gatekeeping, again, really simplified information that everybody needs to know. And it's like we have this pipe dream that we're going to have full-time strength coaches on every campus, and it's like that's just not feasible. There's not enough people
Right.
passionate about the market to even get certified to go into those positions, much
Yep.
less, we're in a coaching shortage right now in every position. So it's like we can't just be opening these brand new positions everywhere. So the book is kind of, and my consulting company is kind of targeted at hey, here's really, really simple ways that you can better prepare your athletes for sports and do so safely and do so without consuming you as a coach when you're driving a bus, you're coaching 2 sports, you have 3 classroom preps, all the things that all the other duties as assigned that we have as coaches.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And it sounds like, we're quite some miles apart. And it sounds like despite that, like that was actually what I was getting ready to say. And then you kind of answered it for me, right? I was getting ready to ask you, like, and can every school even afford that or have the resources to do that or have the person to do that? And then you answered it for me right there.
Yeah, and I think that that's where, like, I'm also on the board for the National High School Strength Coaches Association. That's where they came out with their certification. It's like $129 or something like that. It's self-paced. It's not a pay a bunch of money and pass a test. It's like a didactic learning situation where you go in. It's marketed, to the person that's serving as a sport coach, trying to fill the role of a strength coach. So that information is
Right.
becoming more available because no, not my husband used to work at a school where he's a football, baseball coach, and he worked at a school
Okay.
that had 6 coaches on the boys' side. And it's like you have 6
Yep.
coaches for all the kids and all the sports. And of course, it's a small school, but it's like you can't take one of those 6 coaches and allocate it to just one thing. Like
Right.
it's
Yep.
just not feasible. And then you're also not going to get, some of these like really remote rural areas, you're just not going to get a strength coach to move to the middle of West Texas or wherever,
Yep.
and live out in the desert, unfortunately, for some of these made up positions.
Yeah. It's also, yeah, that's 100%. That's a great point. All of that. And it's also one of those things, like you said, where it's like, it's so hard because there's not a whole lot of people who are like super interested and willing to do it. Like a lot of times, and I hate to say it, but this is why I think you're so important. A lot of times it's like a head coach who ends up doing it. And sometimes that head coach doesn't necessarily even know kind of what they're doing, unfortunately, right? Because they're like, well, I've coached football forever, but like, I don't know. Plus the other challenge with the strength and conditioning coaches from this side of it, just to kind of wrap my point up here with this, is like, so the strength and conditioning coach, for those who don't know, probably spends more time with the kids than anyone, arguably. Maybe in football you might spend a lot of time with your position coach potentially, things like that maybe, but a lot of times your strength and conditioning coach is the guy or the gal that you see the most. And the thing is, like, that person has to be available year round or almost year round, and so I think that already eliminates another, how many people that are like, I got, so much going on, I can't give up. Because I know a lot of coaches that will, they'll come around during the season or a little bit before the season, or they'll stop in periodically, or, but to be there every single day, from start to finish throughout the year is tough for a lot of people. And I think if you want to be successful, you almost kind of got to have that out of your strength and conditioning coach. They have to be the one your kids see the most.
Yeah, it's not an easy profession. It's not a profession for everyone, and that's the other reason where it's like I don't think we just need to go out promoting like, hey, random person, like this is for you, because it's just
Right.
most good strength coaches, I think, have a different mindset. Like we
Mhm.
are ready to suffer now. Like we enjoy the suffering. That's not something that a normal person likes. I like being sore. I like, you know,
Yep.
I like it. I like watching kids like nosebleed and like blood vessel pop in their eye at a powerlifting meet. Like I find that stuff fun and cool. Like that's not a normal thing that
Yep.
normal people like. And then on top of that, just the lack of work-life balance that is present in many sectors of the field is really just not for everybody, and that's okay.
I definitely agree with that. Out of curiosity, where does some of your kind of your pillars of coaching, your foundational pieces, your methods, where does that stuff kind of come from?
That is such a hard question for me because those things are so I tell people this a lot. Like it's so deeply ingrained in me. I can't even tell you where I learned stuff from. You know what I mean? Because I've been doing it
Yep.
for 20 years. Like people are like,
Right.
"What's a great resource for this or resource for that?" And I'm like the filing system in my mind, like sometimes it takes me a while to access, like to dig through and find that file, because I'm not 26 anymore. I'm a little bit older than that, you know what I mean? But
Yep. Yep.
I think my pillars, really, my biggest thing is athlete safety, doing whatever it takes to keep our athletes healthy, and that really just has come from seeing it done really poorly over the years and also seeing what the model of sports is today, where it's play year round, compete year round, practice year round. And so I've had to change my philosophy from one of, I worked at the D1 level. And so I had access to my athletes 360 out of 365 days a
Yep.
year.
Yep.
I knew what they were doing all the time. Then fast forward to coming to the high school level, I'm working with what ended up being the number one nationally ranked volleyball program in the country at the high school
That's
level. And if I don't change my approach to one of this is not off, this is my off season at the high school, but it's not their off season as a club volleyball player because they're still in season. If I don't change that approach to one that's focused on how they're coming in on that given day, then I end up injuring that athlete, ruining that athlete's career, and we don't become, what we ended up becoming, which is number one nationally ranked because I didn't take care of people. So I think seeing things done wrong, from
great
on the
message.
athlete health and safety standpoint has been a big pillar of my coaching. The other piece that's really been a latecomer in my career is just kind of like the mental health and like developing a positive relationship with training. That's one that I didn't get figured out till like the last 3 or 4 years, honestly. Like I took that like do what I say because I said so kind of approach. And
Yep.
all
Yep.
of a sudden, yeah, all of a sudden I look around and I'm like, this doesn't work with kids anymore. They're way smarter than you and I were. I mean, that's the people are like kids these days. And I'm like, no, actually, it's because they're smart. Like, and they have a constant choice between two things. Like, do they want to be lazy or and because that feels good, or do they want to get on their phone and scroll, or do they want to go to sleep at the right hour, or do they want to work hard? Like, and so we have to constantly show the value in, like you mentioned at the first part of the show, like we have to show the value in what we do and why that's going to help them. And so I think that that's a big piece is, we call ourselves teachers, but we have to teach the value in things, not just the actual like X's and O's of what we do in the weight room. So that's kind of a rambly answer, to your question,
No,
but
that's a great answer though. And there's actually a couple things that you mentioned in there that are great transitions because a few of those things that you mentioned, I actually have written as questions because I think they're very interesting conversations. Plus, I've kind of listened to some of your other podcasts that you've done in different things, and I think you have. I just think you're a very well-rounded, knowledgeable person, and I think your viewpoints on a lot of things, if not, not to toot your horn or whatever, but if anything, I don't think there's anything I've heard that I've been like, yeah, that's not spot on. You are very well-rounded, very knowledgeable. So there's a couple of these things in that answer that you actually gave that I want to talk about today because I think your answers before are really, really awesome. One thing I want to ask before let's go right to it. Do you think so do you believe it's more challenging as a coach today, and how have you adapted your coaching to today's athlete?
I do believe it's more challenging. I believe it's more challenging because there's 100 different things kids could be doing. They can be on their phones, they could work, they could, you know what I mean? Like there's a million things that they could be doing. They can even be playing, if you're speaking from the perspective of a high school coach, they don't have to play for you. That's not where they're getting recruited. They can go
Right.
to a club,
Yep.
they can pay to play. That is a completely different, like private, even from a strength and conditioning standpoint, it's a totally different vibe when there's money crossing the table. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's like
Yep.
you're paying for my services now.
Nowadays
Um,
they
so
transfer too.
Oh, yes, and really, like, it's so easy now, even at the high school level, to transfer. At the
Yep.
collegiate level, it's don't like it, move on, find your best fit, and I think there's pros and cons to that. The other thing is,
Agreed.
parents just do not want any hardship, and I wanna preface that with, I'm not a parent. I'm not gonna tell you how to parent. I am simply speaking from my experience as a coach, where at the drop of a hat, you have little Susie is upset over something, and the parents coming in, "Why did you X, Y, and Z?" Well, she didn't follow the rules. These are the consequences established, whatever.
Yep.
So I think that those things coupled with whatever happened to people during the time we were in quarantine that, you know, I don't know if it was a maturity loss of maturity because kids missed a year and a half of social skills at a really developmental time sometimes. But
That
I
was
just
part of it
noticed
for
like
sure.
it was super hard. And, we
Yep.
came back and there was like this extension of grace on everything. And like it really never stopped, it seemed like, because people didn't transition back into normal. I didn't feel like ever in schools. And so it was just like kids are, for better for worse, they're much more aware of their anxiety, of their mental health issues, and they are verbalizing those things. And so, as a coach, it's very heavy to deal with those situations on a daily basis. You have, I, in the final year that I was coaching full time at the high school level, probably reported 4 or 5 kids like for cutting themselves. I had a former athlete commit
Mm.
suicide. I had multiple athletes that I was referring for eating disorders. And those are all things, with the exception of suicide, those were all things I'd encountered before, but the frequency at which they were occurring was much higher.
Right.
So I do think that it's much more challenging as a coach, for good or for bad. How I adapted to that system with the value thing, everything is about showing value in what you're doing. And so you have to demonstrate results. You have
Yep.
to be very, very transparent. It's no longer just do this. It's do this, and here's how it's going to help you be a volleyball player or a football player or whatever.
Right.
And then you're going to get more buy in with that because you've explained something. Even if it's, squatting for a football player and squatting for a volleyball player, how you explain that to them is going to create better buy in. From the standpoint of like dealing with parents, one of the things that I did, with club this year is I was like, hey, like if I'm going to take this position, I'm going to have a meeting with the parents going into it, and I'm going to address X, Y, and Z, which are common misconceptions, complaints, concerns with strength and conditioning. I'm going to nip that stuff in the bud. And also, I'm going to put myself in a position where they can walk up to me and talk to me on that first night, where they can walk up and they can talk to me at any time to make sure that they understand that, like, you don't need to sit and me with your kid if you don't like something I'm doing. Like, just come and approach me directly. And then the final piece is just moving away from traditional coaching methods that are like really punitive in nature. It doesn't teach the behavior that we want out of kids. It creates negative emotions associated with the training process. It only modifies the behavior when you're standing there as a coach. So trying to find use more positive reinforcement methods, which if you
What are some of those, if you don't mind me cutting in there? What are some of those methods that you speak of? Because we have a lot of quote unquote old school, coaches, and I would say even to a degree, I'm an old school coach. But I also think the reason that I have kids that buy in and do well is because I've also adapted and learned how to connect, and I also know which kid which kid to coach which way. I'll
yeah.
also add in, but what are some of those traditional ways that you think coaches need to get rid of?
We need to stop using exercise as punishment, like period, end of discussion.
Okay.
The only so running is punishment. Like we all hate running because that's what you did when you got in trouble when you were in high school. Like also because running sucks and it hurts. But primarily because there's like, I mean, you think about it in the context of food. Think about, like for us, we would get ice cream when we had some kind of celebratory family event. And
Yeah.
so like ice cream became conditioned as like a positive thing,
A
right?
reward almost,
A
right?
reward. Okay. So like when I think of ice cream, like it's like it makes me have good emotional
I
feelings.
get yep, I get
Yeah.
you.
So I can do the same thing with a
This is a great
negative
point.
emotional feeling.
This
So
is an
I
amazing
can,
point.
yeah. So like if I have an activity and there's just constant negative associations with it, or vegetables, like I didn't like vegetables when I was little, and it wasn't just that I didn't like the taste, it was also that I was put on a timer and said, if you don't eat this by this amount of time, you get a spanking, right?
Yep.
So now it's not just I don't like spinach out of a can because it's disgusting. 80s kids will understand that. It's I don't like spinach out of a can because I'm going to get punished if I don't eat it. Like that's we can condition those things. And we do the same thing with exercise. It's like, why don't our kids want to work hard? Why don't the kids want to run hard? And it's like, well, they perceive it as a punishment. And so, like, for me as a strength coach, like, I'm big on push ups and push up progressions. And I just tweeted something about this today where it's like, stop using this as punishment in practice because, like, I have this like beautiful progression and kids are just like, I don't want to do that because their entire career, it's been, you didn't dig a ball, you have 5 crappy push
Yeah.
ups or whatever. So that's the biggest thing for me. Like,
So
I
you got
don't,
me on that one a little bit because so at practice I'm a big like drop a ball, hit 10 push-ups. So that's great advice. Like that's something that I don't know about as much anymore actually because I kind of am like save your energy for the next rep,
right.
honestly. But I would say probably at the beginning of my career I was definitely like, hey, you dropped the ball, 5 push-ups, 10 push-ups.
As were we
Nowadays
all. And
I'm
yeah.
a
And,
little bit smarter now that I've kind of jumped into this field, but
and
with
that's the
trying to,
thing is that like I used punishment. I mean, there are times like I'm pretty outspoken about, like athlete safety on Twitter and, all
yep,
these rhabdo cases and whatnot. And there's at least 2 incidents that I can look back on in my career that were punishment sessions that like there but for the grace of God, we were not on the ticker on ESPN. You know what I mean? Because it's like
right,
it was extreme and I was making a point and it worked. I never, for 4 years, that cycle of athletes that were there were never late. Again, it did stop that unwanted behavior, but in the
yep,
process, you set yourself up for some risk as coach. But the thing is, like with what you said, like you drop a pass, you do 10 push-ups, you haven't actually gotten better at catching the football, right?
facts,
Because you've gotten better at doing push-ups, but you
yep,
need to, like you just said, go take that next rep. And also, like, there's a big difference in mindset between like, I want to catch a pass because I don't want to be a drill killer and I want practice to go well and I want my team to go well and I
good
want
point.
to I want to be successful in a football game and take reps for that. And the flip side of that is I'm going to catch this pass because I'm afraid and I don't want to do something.
Avoid
And
punishment.
and so I think going back to like kind of the mental health thing, like what we're doing in practice should be in. And some people will listen to this and be like, "Oh, that's soft." And I used to think the same thing, but it's like our practices like should be building confidence in our athletes, not tearing that confidence down. Now, should there be consequences for things? Yes, but the consequences need to make sense, right? So going and running a mile because you dropped a pass or you shanked a volleyball pass or whatever, like that doesn't really make sense because the two activities aren't related.
Right.
Redoing the rep, that makes sense. That's a natural consequence and one that makes sense in the context that we're using it. And I saw gosh dang, I forget what his name was, but he had like a list of progressive consequences where it was like do the rep over, then it's like a reset where it's like, hey, like we've done the reps over, we're not getting it. Let's all like walk out of the facility, come back in, reset. Okay, that's not working. You that are continuing to be lazy and not do what I ask, you're going to go take a timeout. And as soon as you're ready to come back in, step back in the drill. And so then it's like you're giving that athlete autonomy in that process. They step back in when they're ready, right? Okay, now that doesn't work. Gone. You're gone for the day. Like, you're not punished. Like, I'm not blowing a gasket. I'm not ruining team practice, which that's the biggest change in how I've started handling those things. I used to get so angry and like so keyed up. Like, I'd just be like shaking, like my paper with my workouts crumpled up. All my other athletes are like looking at the floor, like, oh my God, what is she going to do? And then it's like the rest of the session, whether you've removed the ass hat or not, like the rest of the session is a disaster because your blood pressure is like
Yep.
240 over 180, right?
Been there.
And so now it's like, just have those progressive consequences. Let it be the athlete's choice. If it's not, you lost your chance to get better for the day. All right. And then we come back in and we're going to have a new day the next time. So that is not just from their mental health standpoint. My mental health has been tremendously improved by
Most
taking those approaches.
I also think too, and I had an instance like this back when I coached at Romulus High School right here by the Detroit Metro Airport. I had an instant with a kid. He was a senior, and we were really struggling to get him to kind of just do things at the top of his, like, do things with maximum effort is the best way to put it. And I think a lot of times as coaches, we don't really think to try this approach because we always think to discipline, but it's like we pulled this kid aside and basically challenged him, instead of benching him, what we actually told this kid, and this might be a little bit crazy, but we told him he was going to start instead. We said, look, you're going to start Friday night. We're going to start you. You're a senior. But from this point forward, there's not a single rep that you're going to take off. So we're going to and I know that sounds crazy, right? Because it sounds like you're giving somebody something before they've earned it, but that something could also be taken away, the first rep of the game. If somebody's lazy or whatever. But the thing was, the kid, instead of disciplining him by challenging this kid, he actually rose up and started the whole rest of the year and was great. And now he's been in the military for several years. He's high rank. He just does wonderful things. He's got a kid that he takes care of and does great. I mean, he's just an amazing person now. But I really think for this kid, that moment of knowing that kid was going through something in his personal life and just giving him a chance to be great instead of yelling or disciplining him really changed his life. And again, that's something you got to kind of read as a coach, and you got to kind of know your athletes. But that was a moment that I kind of learned that maybe don't give everybody a starting job, but maybe you challenge people to do great instead of discipline them. Give them a belief that, hell, you could do this. You could be amazing at whatever you're trying to do in that moment, on that day in general. And that was a big lesson for me too. And I've pulled several guys up aside now at football and said, we need more because you're capable and because you could be this or you can do this. And I just know it's there for you. And it typically works a little better than just yelling at a kid, because I have kids and I've been coaching for 8-10 years now, but the kids will, it's a different world, right? They're a different type of kid, but they live in a different type of world, right? Like none of us would be any different if we grew up with cell phones and grew up during COVID. And like, our kids have had it kind of really difficult, to be honest. And I think you got to understand that as coaches and really challenge them to do great things and rise up.
I agree. That's a hill that I will die on and spoke about on a recent podcast that at the core of human beings, I don't think kids are different. The DNA is not different.
Right.
But the environment that they're raised in is tremendously different. And
Great point.
they are all constantly exposed to their phone and like those repeat dopamine hits. And so that is altering brain chemistry, to be sure. And so we just have to, pivot how we coach in order to reach this generation. And the other thing is like the kids these days mindset, like they said the same thing about us when we were growing up. So it's like, I got vaping in schools is like the biggest thing ever, right? And like
Right.
when it first started becoming a problem, people are just like in a blind panic. They're like, this new issue, new issue. And I'm like, isn't there a song from like the 70s or something called Smoking in the Boys Room? Like, people, these are not new problems. They're just a little bit more advanced
It's
from a
just
technology
different.
standpoint.
Right. Yep. Yep. Same thing. Just I know that sounds contradicting, but it is the same thing but different. That's all
Yep.
it is. No, you're right. And honestly, if we're gonna blame anybody, in my opinion, we gotta blame teachers, parents, and coaches. You don't blame the kids. You blame the people that are old enough that, provide the foundation, the discipline, the knowledge. Like, we're the ones that are shaping the kids, right? If I know a lot of kids who have great parents and have great coaches around them, and they're great kids. They don't spend all night on their phone. They don't do this and that. They're involved in this. They go to Dollars for Scholars. They, all types of good stuff they're involved in, and a lot of that's is a direct reflection. I'm not saying always. Obviously, you got to get, if you're in a bad situation, you can always rise out of it. If you're not in a great home life or whatnot, but a lot of times you can see like that's it goes with it, right? Is like you at home, if we're gonna blame anybody, it's like we have to be better as parents, and parents first and foremost, and teachers and coaches, like first and foremost, those three groups. You know what I mean? It ain't on the young kids that don't know any better as they're learning through life. It's on us to teach and to do better.
Totally agree.
I think it's lazy, right? I'll be honest. I think it's a cop out. It's like a lazy, like, oh, these kids are just different. They're difficult. Like, no, man, you just have to do better and provide them with better. To transition though, because we've touched on this a few times, and I'm very interested in your answer on this. So, what kind of are your thoughts overall on mental health and how student athletes, can prioritize it?
My first thought on mental health is that that's not actually our job as coaches. And I think that I have seen a number of cases that should have been referred, that came to me that, either a coach mentioned something and I was like, did you send that to the counselor? And they're like, no, I mean, it was just a comment made in passing. And I'm like, okay, like when you hear certain things, like when you hear a child saying, am I bipolar? Like, or I'm severely depressed right now, or, there's a laundry list of things that I, as a coach, am not qualified to deal with. So I think that that is a huge thing, is having an open dialogue with your school counselor's office, or if you work in the private sector, having someone to refer to, having a contact with a parent, something along those lines, that you can get an athlete the help that they need as fast as possible. When we try to take those things on ourselves and just coach them through a hard time or whatever it is, when they're legitimately struggling from a mental health standpoint, like that's scary, scary stuff. And as
Definitely.
I mentioned, we had an athlete that unfortunately passed away due to suicide a couple years ago. And, he had a previous attempt, and he definitely had a support system in place. But at the same time, like I can remember seeing some specific things in his behavior that I thought to myself, why didn't I report that? And it was 6 months removed from those things, but nonetheless, like if you even like if there's even a sniff of something that you think might need to be referred, you've got to refer it as a coach. If you see weird cut marks on kids that just shouldn't be there, that are
Right.
symmetrical, you just refer out on that kind of stuff. If a kid comes to you and shares information with you, one of the best lines that I learned from the athletic trainer that I used to work with at TCU is, I had a kid come and share like a really bad incident that had happened in campus housing, that had a weapon involved. And I
Mm,
was like, ooh, that's
mm,
scary, because she's
mhm.
the only one that knows. So if it gets reported, they know it was her. Now she's in danger. And the athletic trainer was like, Missy, if an athlete comes to you and says something like that, the response that you need to tell them is that if you've trusted me with this information, you need to trust what I'm going to do to handle this information and who I'm going to in turn trust with it. So big thing, big long rant to say refer out, because it's not our job as coaches. However, ways we can address mental health, just, the big, larger picture.
Right.
Obviously, just taking care of yourself from a physical health standpoint. So adequate nutrition. Hunger is a real thing. And if we're not rested, if we're not fueled, you are in a much poorer state to handle adversity when it comes at you. And we can, as adults, all think of situations where we've, haven't had enough rest. And that results in us making a really bad decision that then stacks on top
Yep.
of each other. So I think making sure that we've, having rest, having boundaries. I think that as adults, we need to let kids like say no and have boundaries and those kinds of things, and respecting those boundaries. I think that being an open door, like, yes, we're going to go refer things, but at the same time, like, gone should be the days of coaching where we're like this dictator, this like disciplinarian that athletes are afraid of. Like, the last thing that I want to be in 2024 is a coach that my athletes are afraid to come up and talk to. Because they need somebody like that can help them make some decisions sometimes, or that they can share information with. And then from a what can athletes actually do, get off your phone, like get away from social media, like
Mhm.
set the timers, like be on there
Yep.
less. Have a realistic understanding that the things that you're seeing on there, the influencers, that's not what they look like. I got an option on here before we started to retouch my appearance. I chose moderate because I have bad lighting in here, but it will retouch me all the way up to heavy. Like, what you're looking at online is not reality. And I think that,
Right.
and it's all AI now anyway. So like, they
Yeah,
aren't
that's
doing those
scary.
workouts. They don't look like that. They don't eat those foods. So having a more realistic expectation of what life actually looks like. And that's hard for a kid to figure out because they
Definitely.
don't have a filter like we have to realize that stuff's going on. So just in general, try to stay away from social media as long as you can, as much as you can as an athlete.
Yeah, almost too many of these kids, their whole experience outside of like school and sports is their phone. And our experiences outside of school and sports were riding bikes, they were riding four-wheelers, they were canoeing, skipping rocks, they were doing all these different things that a lot of us grew up doing. And like, yeah, I had a Nintendo 64 growing up and whatnot, but we also it wasn't like a virtual reality type or these new type of video games that like kind of fully immerse these kids and into them, where it's like they're so addicting where, you know, again, I'm not saying Mario Party wasn't fun too for a while, but some of these are like it's almost like living in a false reality. And so everything outside of sports or school is like just whatever they're consuming on there, like you said, and a lot of it's fake and it's garbage. It's hard. I try to tell kids if you're going to use social media, use it productively, like get on Twitter and post your highlight film, and get off. Use it for stuff like that because it can be really, really useful, right? If you are using it to try to get a scholarship, which means, no crazy pictures, no, again, you can't scroll all night. You need to get some sleep, those sort of things. But it is definitely hard because it's their number one battle. It's this generation's number one battle. And it's tough because again, a lot of people are dealing with mental health problems, and a lot of kids find almost comfort. Right? It's kind of like a drug, if I'm being honest. Social media is. It's like it's not really any different than finding comfort in alcohol or whatever. And it's something that I think you're right. We got to keep the kids away from it as much as possible. I know that's harder when they're teens, but I think what you said earlier to kind of wrap this point up really matters too. Just make sure your kids are busy, give them some structure, and make sure they know why they're doing everything. Because at that point, my daughter's 10, but she's she does a lot. She's involved in a lot. She likes to draw. She likes to play sports. She reads a ton. She just does a lot, and we don't allow her to kind of, get set. And I know it's going to be harder for some teenagers that may already be set, but especially if you have a younger child, like get them set in a routine. And it's never too late to set your routines. I know 50, 60-year-old people who change. You can always set those routines, but it's just one of those things where you have to get in good habits and be disciplined. So one thing I do want to ask, any advice for how, a young student athlete can prioritize rest and nutrition? Because when I go to, and I'll just tell you why I want to ask you this, because tapping back to earlier, very knowledgeable. But when I talk to kids about this, we have these talks and a lot of it's like, well, I can't because, my parents buy this or this happens, or I ain't got time. So I got to go to McDonald's So do you have any kind of advice that you could give to prioritize those things?
Yeah, I think that this is one more example of we want to operate in a perfect, like utopian world where kids have access to all of this and they have financial resources and blah, 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 blah. But, and they also are eating like grilled chicken and rice and broccoli 5 meals a day. That's not real. So, what can we do? We can ask them to, hey, your nutrition is not perfect, but can you bring a snack to school with you before athletics, before practice that has a carbohydrate and a protein? Like, let's start there. And
Simple.
then, exactly, simple. Now we've got that down. Can we eat a fruit or vegetable
Simple.
one time a day? You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
yep, be great. 6 to 7 servings of fruits and vegetable. I know what's recommended. Like, I know what nutritionists say. I understand, like, if you're going to fully commit and do all these things, but just like with us, when we reestablish a routine or we change a habit, like you've got to make small, you got to chip away at it. So I think that that's the big piece is that, again, realistic expectations of reality. You are not going to completely overhaul your diet. Some people will, the 1%ers will completely overhaul their diet because they got a nutrition consult and they did XYZ. They just simply didn't know. And that was their only entry barrier into a perfect nutrition program. But for the
Right.
rest of the people, small changes. And the same thing with rest. Okay, reality. They're going to finish their homework. They're going to scroll on their phones. Can we scroll a minute less tonight? Can we scroll 5 minutes less? Can we scroll? Actually, back up. Will we turn on night shift and take the blue tones out of our phone after a certain time frame, right? Just start there, right? Now, can we do 1 minute less? Can we do 5 minutes less? So I think the big thing is one, work within your parameters. Like the thing is that some kids work, people are always like, oh, you have to get 8 to 10 hours of sleep. I'm like, well, some people work for a living. Like I work for a
Right.
living, and there's some days that I can't get 8 to 10 hours of sleep because I don't get home from club until 9:15. Then I got to eat dinner. Like by that time, the clock's ticking. I'm already 8 hours from the time I have to wake up. By
Yep.
the time I get all my adulting done, that's now 7, 6.5, whatever. So we can make kids feel like a failure, or we can say, okay, you're not going to get enough sleep. Can we improve the quality of your sleep? Can we turn our phone on to white noise? Like, can we have like dark in our room? Like little small changes like that versus continuing to hammer these like 7 to 9 hours or you're not dedicated narratives that I see all the time on strength and conditioning and nutrition Twitter.
Yeah, that's great advice, honestly. And I think one thing that gets a lot of people, adults and kids, is some people are so overwhelmed. They think it's so much to do, not just get healthy, but like they think it's so much to do something, right? We see that in like fitness and that all the time where it's like you don't have to start, running 7 miles a day. You could just get a half mile and walking if you need to the first day. Then go get you a mile and walking, the second day or whatever. Just keep getting better. I always, start with, 10 push-ups every hour if that's how you need to start to kind of get yourself back in shape. Anything, I think people get overwhelmed and so they quit because it's easier just to go, holy crap, that's a lot, I'm done. even getting healthy. You know, I've had to kind of redo my diet in a whole lot of ways because I'll be honest, I kind of slipped up. Just to be transparent, like I don't have a reason to lie. And I slipped up for a while. I was good for a long time, and then I slipped up for a while. And now I'm sort of kind of revamping it as I've hit over 32 and I'm starting to get older. And it's a lot. It's a lot when I look at what I'm trying to add to my diet or take away, or different things I'm trying to add to my fitness. But it's like, okay, we'll just start here, right? And then once we get that down, then we can move here. And it was a great point because I think people get super overwhelmed, and I think the message was incredible. I think just start little and conquer that, and then go a little bit day by day. I do the same thing with like accomplishments. Not to keep rambling, but you know, our buddy who sponsors our show, Spooky, shout out. But he put on Facebook today about what's the first thing you do when you get out of bed in the morning. And I always try to get up and make my bed and make sure that everything's kind of cleaned up in my room, just because I want to accomplish something small before I go try to accomplish something bigger for the day. And it's one of those things where it's really like you do feel better once you get a couple things smaller done, maybe around the house. You know, you kind of have a good rhythm in the morning, and then you go about your day. You just feel better because you've already got something done, even though it was something small. But that's a step to what's next.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, I think there's like an actual word or phrase for it, but like it's just getting started. Like, you know, I said the book or whatever. I'd had that on my list of like, I need to do it, I need to do it, I need to do it. And then like one day I was like, okay, I don't even know where this is going, but I'm just gonna start something.
I
And I
love
just wrote some words down, like, and all of a sudden, like 6, 8 months later, like there's a book in my Google Drive, and it's gone to an editor, and like now it's
That's
going to a
awesome.
book designer, and like then it'll go to marketing, and you know, and it's like all because I said, like, instead of looking at I have to write X number of chapters and all these pages and da 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 da, I literally just sat down and was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't even have a title, but I'm just going to do something to say that I started. And if I can't think of anything else to write on it, or any, you know, even if it comes out bad, like at least I tried. And then it's like all of a sudden I'd find myself like doing 2 or 3 hours here and, you know, 15 minutes there and whatever. And before you know it, like you get stuff done.
Absolutely. I love that. So before we get out of here today, if you, I don't know if you said it earlier off the top of my head, if you said when the book's coming out and where we'll be able to find it. But if not, we'll have, if you don't mind, at the end here in a minute, we'll have you drop your Twitter so we can find it when it comes out. Cause I will definitely, pick up a copy of it. So this is our last question. How can we convince our kids to stay away from this Instagram culture? This Instagram training culture.
Um, that is really, really hard, because it is so appealing to 3 tips to a six pack or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like your best triceps in 5 minutes a day. Like whatever stupid, like catchy 15-second short form blurb that they see from an influencer is
Yep,
interesting, it's exciting,
they
it's like
love it.
done in a cool reel, like it taps that pain point that they have. And then we're like, let's squat for football. You know what I mean? Like, and so it's like, what pain point are we addressing? So I think really it has to do a lot with building a relationship of trust, of because ultimately like what in marketing, so I know this from my book, it's like, okay, well, do you have an email list? I'm like, no, I don't. I have like an email list of like 50 people. And it's like, what relationship do you have with an email list? And I'm like, what do you mean a relationship with an email address? Well, what that means is I subscribe to several newsletters. I read those newsletters. Now all of a sudden the person writing that newsletter, I trust and have buy-in with what that person says. So now when
Right.
they go to sell me a product or explain a concept that maybe I don't understand, because of that pre-existing relationship, I'm more likely to buy, believe, whatever. It's the same thing with athletes. Like if we can build that value in our messaging with them and build that trust. And a huge piece of that is demonstrating results with our training. Then instead of them coming in and being like, oh, coach, I did this workout from so and so, they're coming in with a piece of paper that says, hey, coach, I saw this online. What do you think about it? And
That makes sense. Yeah.
that's a sunshine and rainbows perspective. The reality is, like, you're going to have some rogue athletes that are going to go do that stuff on the weekend. They're going to completely ignore what you say. But the 95% of athletes that we're referencing, if you do build that relationship, if you do explain the whys behind things, like where and when possible, if you show them results and build that trust, we're in a much better, place to get them to not want to do the stupid Instagram stuff. Now, sometimes they're still going to do stupid stuff. And that's where we as coaches need to figure out, is that really messing with my training program? Or am I just pissy because they're doing something outside of what I'm doing? So an example of that I had this group of 2 or 3 athletes at the college level that they just like to do like crazy stuff. Like one of them would do trick shots with her, she golfed as well. And she would do trick shots in their house, like banging golf balls off the wall and hitting with her dad. And they would post all this stuff. Well, they decide that they want to go surf across like stability balls. So they want to see how many that they can surf across in a row. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, all right, let's think through this. Is this hurting my training program? No.
No.
Is this damaging equipment? No. Is one of them going to get hurt? Maybe, but come on, like, you can get hurt walking across the parking lot.
Right.
Is this going to annoy my boss? Absolutely did. Let's do it. Like, so I think in the end, they end up surfing across like 5 stability balls because they've seen it on Instagram. Right. And it's like, we all have a fun time. It doesn't interfere with training. Nobody gets hurt. Like, it doesn't like mess with my program. All it took was them dragging 5 stability balls out into the indoor turf room. So I think, again, just like as a coach, like, look at it, make a decision. Is it really hurting your program that they're going and doing like some buys and tries in the rec center on the weekends because they want to look cool in a tank top? Like, is that really messing with your program? Or are you just getting butt hurt because they're not doing exactly what we say, kind of thing?
I think that's actually a great point. No, that's an awesome point. I think the second point you added onto that super important too, to ask yourself as a coach, because I think I've probably found myself a few times being mad just because of, of that reason. But I also think with your pillar of coaching, right, where you talked about earlier with safety, like if the kids, that all ties in together. If they trust you and they trust what you're doing and you're showing them the why and you're doing things safe, they're going to look at things and know whether it's like, all right, this could be fun to try, or that's probably going to get me hurt. So I think that's an amazing point. I appreciate you coming on tonight, Coach. Great episode, great conversation. We're going to do just a few athletes of the week here in our area. We do them every week. And then we'll have you drop your links if you don't mind, and then we'll get out of here. So our student athletes of the week here in Monroe County, Graham, you said Graham Jungie from Flat Rock Basketball. 14 3-pointers and 47 points in a victory over Jefferson. That's a school. Both of those are school records. Victoria Gray, Bedford girls basketball. She had 14 points and 22 points in wins this week as Bedford went to 11-1 on the year. Honorable mentions: JC Amhine, Dundee Wrestling, 7-0 in the LCAA tourney. He had 7 pins, including 6 in a minute 5 or less. He also had a victory over the number 1 wrestler in Division 4. For those of you who don't know, Dundee Wrestling is like super, super legit every year. And then Jaylee Jones, Summerfield girls basketball. She had 13 points and 12 rebounds in a victory over Whiteford. Coach, is there any links that you'd like to drop before we get out of here?
Well, eventually I will have a website, but that's being built right now. So follow me, please, on Twitter and Instagram at Missy M.Mcbeth, MCBETH. That's my handle on both platforms. And yeah, website to be continued, but I think it's going to be MissyMitchell-Mcbeth.com. And all of my, obviously, when the book launches, if that's something that you're interested in purchasing, would be available through that website along with through my social media.
Awesome. I will definitely be posted on your social media for the book, and I'm going to grab me a copy as soon as it comes out. 100%. I appreciate this awesome conversation. I look forward to potentially talking more strength and conditioning and athletes and that sort of thing in the future. Thanks for coming on tonight. Guys, we are back next week at 4 p.m. It's a special time, start time, 4 p.m. Eastern on February 11th for our Super Bowl special. We have Coach Poe coming in from Concordia. Shout out to him. He's going to come in, and we're going to talk some Super Bowl on Sunday. So see you guys then. Thank you guys for another great show.